So sometimes you put down your mouse for months on end and it's easy to forget how to do things in Revit. So I have a little project here to review some of the basic features of Revit and kind of how to strategize to put together a model. Not getting too deep into every single element, but also trying to get an overview of how to work efficiently in Revit. And so let's create a custom kitchen, outdoor kitchen. I found this little video here on the internet, which of course is not very reliable. So it's probably created by AI. I don't know. I put the link in the notes here. But it gives us a chance to create a number of different features that are obviously important to know how to do. And if you don't like mine, you can absolutely go and create your own. There's a link to a Pinterest board here, and you can do your own internet searching. But the main features are some kind of outdoor kitchen, a trellis, all pretty much up against some kind of wall, existing wall of a house or otherwise. Of course, there's a recorded video, which is this. And initially, right off the bat, one of the first things you'll want to think about is this going to be a fully photorealistically rendered model, or are you going to be trying to create, I don't know, a more artistic version? Because your precision level in the model will vary quite a bit. High resolution photorealistic presentations, especially if there's some sort of walkthrough or VR piece, that's a very high bar to make. However, if you're creating something more artistic like these two images here, black and white in particular, takes out the color information. It's amazing how different an image can appear when you provide just black and white imagery and then perhaps some materials or suggestions for materials. And same with an artistic sort of watercolor image. It's amazing how it suggests without getting too hung up on the detail. So creating a new project begins by opening Revit. And one thing that I want to encourage people to do is use the default template. Other templates are kind of bloated. And what I mean by that is if you take a look at the new project menu, it doesn't usually have default in there. But if you click browse, you can see all the templates, and there actually are quite a few, including metric, electrical, other sorts of things that you may need. But default is the one that we want. Let's use that and click OK. That brings up the basic menu. And now we have to begin building stuff. Now the question is, what's the best strategy for putting together a model like this? And it helps to understand how Revit models are put together and what each type of family in Revit is best at doing. And the most basic things in Revit are made of what are called system families. These are walls, stairs, balusters, symbols, that sort of stuff. These are very nice. They're really efficient. However, they only have built-in options and they're difficult to customize. And typically they are placed on an active work plane. So you have to understand that there are work planes, which are basically reference planes in Revit. However, each view has a default work plane. So if you're in floor plan view, the work plane is the floor plan level, floor plan reference plane. And if you're, say, in elevation or reflected ceiling plan, there are work planes associated with those levels as well. So everything you draw will go into those planes. And some objects only go on certain types of reference plans. So, for example, you can't put a wall sticking out from another wall. It has to go on a floor level reference plane. So, anyway, and those objects actually are nice because you can copy them from multiple levels. So I can draw a bunch of walls on the first floor and copy and paste them all onto other levels. And the biggest thing is that these are all parametric. You should understand the difference between instance parameters and type parameters. So you may have 3 different wall types in your project, a thin one, a thick one, and a masonry one. Each of those types may have properties like their materials or their structure. And if you change that, it changes them all. Whereas instance parameters, like in a wall, a typical thing would be a dimension. How high is it? Where does it stop? And where does it start? So how high does it start on the ground level or does it start on some other level? So the next type of family are standalone components. These are probably the most typical sorts of objects you see in your models: doors and windows, all sorts of lighting and other furnishings. And these are great. They are defined by the type of family. So when you're creating a new one, you have to choose kind of in advance what it is. If it's, say, a ceiling mounted light fixture, it's going to have a light source in it, and it's going to be, you guessed it, ceiling mounted. So you do have to kind of think through what the object is going to be. These are drawn as separate files, so you can share them. People can steal them from your models, and they can also email them to you. You can go on the internet and find some. And these have a special massing types particular to these sorts of families, and these are extrusions, blends, sweeps, swept blends, and revolves. These are all sort of rectilinear types of things, and this is typical of most of the stuff we have in our built environment. And these can be solid objects or voids, which can cut other objects. And sometimes you'll find nested components. An example is a door family might have a knob family inserted into it. So to edit the knob, you actually have to edit the door and then edit the knob itself. Finally, most components will have parameters, and they are particular to the family. And of course, things like materials are very common, and these can be instance or type parameters. And it's kind of up to you. If you know you're going to have 4 different chairs that are exactly the same except for the upholstery, you would make that an instance parameter, so it's easy to change. Whereas otherwise, things like dimensional constraints would also be another example of an instance parameter, whereas most other things, the materials or the dimensions, might be type parameters if they don't change in your project. Now, in-place components are similar to standalone components. One big thing that they are not similar in is that if you edit an in-place component, any copies of that component do not change. So these are great for one-off items, things like, I don't know, a bookcase that has to fit into an unusual spot, or something that has to go around a column. Like other objects, like other components, they use the standard massing techniques, and they're drawn on reference planes. Once they're drawn, they do have handy-dandy grips, and these are great for adjusting around elements in your model. So they're a little more flexible. Are you looking for more flexibility? Well, in-place masses are actually great for non-rectilinear shapes. I'm thinking, I don't know, shades for lamps, something like that. So they don't have any of these standard massing tools. Instead, you kind of draw a profile on whatever surface you have chosen as your work plane, and then you can extrude that, and you can edit points and lines and planes on that object to create even more complex shapes, and they can be cut with voids, just like the other objects. So really handy for unusual shapes. If you're not having enough unusual shapes, in particular if you're creating a whole new building, conceptual masses are the way to go. And these are very efficient for modeling, say, a multi-story building that has an unusual shape. And the reason is that surfaces in these conceptual masses can be easily converted into things like walls, roofs. Even multi-level buildings can have all the floors created that take the shape of that multi-level building. Pretty powerful stuff. And there's other elements like adaptive components that can create, I don't know, structural grids or something like that. Really great, but also quite complicated. Now, finally, the one type of object that Revit doesn't create that you often will use are imported objects. Now, SketchUp or DWG, AutoCAD file formats, is in particular a great translation file format that you get objects made in Blender or other 3D modelers that go through that file format. Revit handles those very nicely, and boy, that saves a lot of time. That 3D warehouse is super handy for objects. Finally, materials and lighting. Now, we can do all that in Revit. However, for optimal results, we use a rendering engine. And in particular, if you have to deal with landscape, landforms, or trees, plants, there are rendering programs. We will be using Lumion. And that is where we will create materials and lighting. Now, you still need to create surfaces that have unique materials on them in Revit. This may involve creating split faces on surfaces, or just creating separate objects with different materials. Because the default material in Lumion, well, if anything painted, that default material will change. So things like balusters, you want control of those objects. Well, when you start a new project, the best thing to do is to not jump into Revit, but to think about first what you're going to do. Now, like I mentioned, I'm going to do this space here. I may make some changes to it because I don't really like it. I think sometimes when you get these images and AI has had its way with them, you'll get either columns in weird places or no columns where there should be, and other strange things. But this will give us the basic idea. And based on all these families, you'll want to work your way through the model and just say, how am I going to create these things? And like I mentioned, the in-place masses are going to be great for something like the frame, where you need to work around existing conditions. Whereas the ribs that kind of span the frames, I'm going to make those as a component because they are repeated. Walls, well, those are going to be walls. And even the site is going to be a system family. Things like shelves, well, an in-place component is probably fine for that. Fencing, we can use an in-place mass. I'll show you a little trick for using an object with a transparent cutout of a fence, and can very efficiently model that without a lot of heavy geometry. Furniture and entourage, well, as I mentioned, a lot of that is going to be imported, but like things like plants, we may actually be able to find a lot of that in Lumion or whatever your rendering program is. And if they are native to that program, they're going to be more efficient, which means it's going to cut down on your model lag and also your rendering time. The other thing that you'll want to do is really get a sense of what the dimension of things are. In fact, there's a website called dimension.com, which is like a great name. And it has a lot of typical objects that you can go and look up. I looked up a harvest table kind of thing, just to get a sense of how big that is. That's really helpful to check these things before heading into the model, rather than throw something in and see what happens. Now, sometimes you have to do that. I would also strongly recommend making some kind of sketch. I just kind of sketched out what I thought I was seeing in this model, that there's probably some walls of an existing building. Looked like they were having those walls around the counter area. There was a table. There were some changes in materials, some planting. Having that allows me to roughly estimate how big this space is, again, based on dimension.com's measurements. And that gives me a place to start with my modeling. So let's get to it. Let's get modeling. So the place to start is on the ground. Let's make a site. We can absolutely use Revit's TopoSolid features here on the massing site. These are great and very powerful tools for creating three-dimensional slopes. However, our site, if you take a look at the image, is really pretty flat. So if we take a look here down at the ground, it looks like it's got some wood paving and some stones. So we don't really need all that complex. I'm just going to use a floor. And if you remember, floors are a sketched object. You can just draw them. I would draw them in the middle of these exterior elevation symbols. You don't have to, but it's handy. And let's draw one that's about 50 by 50. Of course, if you don't remember objects in Revit, you can select them and some temporary dimensions come up, and you can type in the number. You don't even need to type in the inches symbol. Everything in Revit is feet, so we can do that. You can also nudge the lines using the left and right arrows, and they nudge based on yours. So Wow, that was hard, right? And here's my floor. It's very exciting to look at. It's a generic floor. Now, if I was going to be using this as an actual site where I would be cutting sections through it and all that, I might give some more thought, maybe make it the thickness of some paving and put a topo solid underneath it. But for us, we're just going for a rendering at this point. So a generic 12-inch floor is fine. Now, if you remember my plan sketch, there were a couple of flooring materials. There's a main area that has some gravel on it, and then there's a couple of walkways. And so let's draw those in. But we don't need to draw a separate object. All we need to do is split the surface of this floor. To do that, you basically just go to the Modify tab that's up here on the ribbon, and you'll see that there is the split face tool. If you select the floor, by the way, the modify ribbon comes up all on its own. Invariably, what happens when you get a couple of minutes into your project is you get this save the project button. Absolutely do that. Don't wait until the end of the day, because if your computer crashes, if something goes wrong, you will have lost everything. In this case, you can save the project and it will save it periodically. And you can even set those reminders, save the backup, which it will save onto your file, and it keeps that updated for you. Anyway, I cannot emphasize enough that you have to save this where it will get backed up. So I have a folder for this semester, for this class, and then even for this project, and save it into there, give it a name that you'll remember what it is so that you can be assured you don't lose your data. When you do this, every time you save it, if it's something like Dropbox or something similar, it will automatically save it. Okay, so we were splitting faces. Let's click on the split face tool, click on the edge of the floor, and now we can just sketch in the lines of the floor separation. I'm going to try to draw it roughly in the middle, and I think I figured out that it's roughly 16 feet. And you can nudge that puppy around just to select it and move it with your cursor, or you can hit the left and right arrows and up and down arrows to move it around. It doesn't have to be in the middle. We're basically using this as a reference site, so not a big deal. And then if I remember, there was a walkway off to one side and a walkway off to the other side. So right now we have this center section and this outer section. To create these other pieces, go back into split face, again, click on the edge. You'll see these light orange lines now appearing. And when you draw them, I recommend drawing them one at a time. I have one that I want to go all the way to the end of my face. All I have to do is draw this one line. I don't want to overlap any lines, and I do want to make sure that it meets this outside wall. And if I want it to be, say, 3 feet wide, I can use an offset value here. I can just use the offset tool. And now when I draw that line, it's exactly 3 feet apart, which seems fine for a garden path. And one thing should be careful of, if I have more than one line, so I want another path going this way, but I believe that the direction of the wood goes the opposite direction from the path. So I'm going to do that as a separate split face. So I'll clear this one by clicking check. Now I have 2 areas. And I'll draw that one last split face. Don't try to draw them all at once, because Revit really hates that. Or don't try to draw them as a rectangle. Again, these overlapping lines, it'll throw an error message. So I'll just delete that and draw those as a single line here. And there you have the rough outline of our site. So looking at our image, let's figure out what materials we need. For the site, there's just some wood decking. It actually goes in 2 different directions, which is a little tricky. Some gravel. There may be some grass back in there somewhere. And then there's other materials, the stone for the wall, and the frame of this trellis has one color, and the wood itself looks like it's a natural wood. So I'm going to want to create something, even if it's just a placeholder material in the model. So let's call up the materials library. Shift M should bring it up, or you can browse to the Manage tab, but Shift M seems to do the trick pretty well. And in the materials library, remember you can view these things in different ways by name, get a thumbnail. You can even make a nice big thumbnail. So I've created some for the gravel and the fieldstone. Let's create one for the ground material for the flooring, and I'll choose create new material. And as a reminder, name these something you'll remember what they are. I can't tell you how many people have like 12 default materials in their project. I use an underscore, but you can use your initials, anything to just help you remember. I'll just call it decking. And you can choose the class. This is handy later on. However, most of us are usually in a rush. So, but absolutely here, let's choose wood just to be efficient. Now, the graphics, usually I use the render appearance, and so that'll make the shaded view about the same as whatever the render appearance is. In this case, I'm going to use a different appearance because I basically have two very similar materials. They're going to be the same, except one is rotated 90 degrees from the other. So in the shaded view, I want to make sure I've got them painted right. So I'll click OK and just use this color instead of the appearance. Then in the render appearance here, I'll use the render library. Now, if you remember, first of all, you can stretch this out so we can see the image a little better, which if your eyes are bad or you're using a tiny little laptop, that's helpful. And then we can replace the asset, which is kind of the base material used in for this material, the base image. And be sure to use the Autodesk Materials Appearance Library. So I'm in here and I'm under the appearance library, of course, under flooring, under wood. You could also type in the search. I'm just going to use this mahogany. I'll click the apply this asset, close this library. Now we have this lovely material. I hit apply and OK. And I should be able to apply all of these materials by just typing in PT for paint. And the decking, which I believe is going horizontal, should go here. Now, if I make this shaded view, I'll see that bright color that I mentioned before. And I'll use the gravel for this gravel area. I believe there's some grass in here. I'll paint pretty much everything else grass. And then this last little piece, I need a new material. So let's go back to our materials library and call up that decking material, and then I'm going to duplicate that material and the assets. And this is very important because if you look up here, the duplicate material, and I'll just call this decking, at 90 degrees or something like that, 90 degrees. I'm going to make the graphics something different, maybe green, so it's easy to recognize. And you see the image here is mahogany, but it's mahogany number 1. If I were to go and change it and I didn't duplicate the assets, these would both change. So you have to make sure to duplicate that assets. And if you forget, there's a duplicate asset button to fix this very problem. Now to rotate the image, just click on the image here. You'll bring up the image editor. And then you can come in and type in some value for the rotation. Let's try 90 degrees since that's the value that we want, and apply. And you should see in the preview that the flooring is going the opposite way. Click OK. And now when I paint, sorry about that, I should have flooring that's going the opposite way. There we go. And see how easy it is to tell in this shaded view. If I hadn't changed those shaded colors, it would be a little tricky. Of course, I can always go down here to realistic view and give it a minute. And now I'll see how the materials are showing up. But I don't like to ride my Revit using the realistic materials all the time. And the reason is it just slows down your computer. You may or may not be able to hear, but my fan is going bananas and the computer is getting really hot. So by all means, stick to shaded view in Revit. This is particularly true if you happen to have Revit and Lumion open at the same time. You want to be careful with your system resources. Okay, let's add some walls. And like I mentioned, you can basically make your way down the toolbar here and create your project. And walls are one of the fundamental elements. Now, one of the big things you'll want to do is choose walls based on the rough sense of how things are put together. So, for example, I believe there's a house back in here, and then we're going to make our trellis supported on 4 pillars. And I think I'll use walls for those too. And so a generic 6-inch wall is probably fine for the house. And when you create a wall, I'll just create it using lines here. You'll see it creates very nice graphics. I'm not going to draw the whole house because I don't really need to do that. Um, and I can use the align tool. I'll just select the wall and hit align, and then align this wall with that reference point. I could even lock it into position. You do have to be careful though. If you do lock it and then you start changing your mind, watch what happens to the floor. The floor outline actually moves as well. So we don't want to do that. I'm going to click that and unlock that. And then this guy, again, I'll use the same align technique here, the aligner and the align. Maybe I'll leave a little bit of space between the two, just so that they're structurally independent. Then for the walls that I'm going to use as the posts, I could absolutely draw these as in-place components or whatever, but walls are awfully simple for doing this. I'll select the wall tool, but I want a masonry wall, and I want it pretty thick, maybe 16 inches. Well, we don't have one. I'm going to take this generic one, and I'm going to make my own. So choose Edit Type. And here, these are the type parameters in this family, this 12-inch masonry one. Well, I'm going to duplicate this guy, and I'll call it 16-inch masonry, because that's how big I want it to be. Now, changing the name does not change the material or the dimension. For that, you have to go to the Structure menu, and in here, it says the materials and the dimension. It's a funny dimension because that's the size of a concrete masonry unit. I can just select it and type it 16 inches because this is a stone wall, so it's a little more freeform. And then I can select the material just by clicking in the box. When you click in the box, this little three dot menu shows up, and then your full materials menu shows up. In fact, you can even create new materials in this menu, which is actually kind of handy. But I'm just going to double click on that material to apply it and hit OK, and then OK, apply and OK one more time. Don't forget to hit it. And then now I finally can just go and draw my wall. Now I'm going to start it a little bit away because I don't really know where it's going to land. I'll come down here and let's say we'll draw it about 2 feet. Okay. And if you're not sure how long it is, you can just select it and type in 2 feet 0, and it should shorten right up. And then you can move it into position by clicking and dragging, or you can use the align tool. Just be careful again with that align tool. Sometimes it moves the wrong line. And then to get the 4 posts, I could do this any number of ways, of course, but I think I'm going to just use mirror to get them, just to make sure they're exactly the same. So choose mirror, draw axis, make sure that you have the copy button selected. And this is just a real quick way, oops, did I get it? I guess I did. To make that copy. Then using this modify tool, I can select these objects. You just have to remember to hold down Control to get both of those columns. And I'll use the same mirror trick here. It's all smoke and mirrors. And now I have myself my 4 posts. So let's take a look at that guy in 3D. 3D, if you remember, is the default 3D view, is this little house up at the top. And there you see it. I have a lovely little frame for my my trellis. The one thing is that we can change the height of these posts. They're kind of a little tall. And that is, if you remember, an instance parameter. So type parameters, you have to edit the type. You have to click the edit type button. But this instance parameter, assuming you have all the same family selected, if available, you can actually change it right here. In this case, it's the unconnected height. Let's go with, I don't know, 12 feet. Let's see what that looks like. With these guys, let's say I want to change the height of all of these walls, make them, I don't know, 18 feet. I can actually select all of these, select all instances, even in the entire project, of this wall type. See, they're both walls, but I'm not getting it. I'm not getting these other ones. I'm only getting these guys. And that's because they're only selecting all instances of that type. Anyway, I can change the number here to say 18 feet. And of course, I'm not being super precise because I really can't see much of the building in the model, but already you can see the models coming together pretty well. And by the way, a common problem, Revit likes to join walls, and I just joined this pier. See how it's different than this one? There's no gap, but I do want a gap. And if you look here at your model, there's a little icon that disallows the join. In fact, let me make my scale a little higher so that you can actually see what's going on. There we go. Now if I click that, you see there's the disallowed join button. What that does, it unjoins those two walls. Now they're separate pieces. See how I've got this back in its own unique separate identity, and now I can drag it back up to where it should be. And that's a really handy way for cleaning up those joins. There's other wall joining tools up on the wall menu to allow you to attach or detach joints like that. So let's go ahead and draw our frame for the trellis. And to do that, we have to, or we should probably draw it on the top of these columns. Now, how do we make our work plane the top of the columns? Well, let's take a look here on the far right. It shows you your work planes. I can click the show button and you'll see it on the ground kind of highlighted. You know, that's the blue area. If I choose under the set work plane, there's a pick a plane button. And I'll just move my mouse over the top of this. And you see how it highlights these different reference planes. I could draw pretty much anywhere. But now when I click on the top of this, my reference plane or my work plane is the top of those columns. But it's kind of annoying. So let me just unshow that, or I suppose hide is the correct word. And then let's create a component in place, because component in place, if you remember, is what you need when you want to make reference to existing geometry. Now, in this menu, there are a lot of different family types in your model. A lot of people just use generic for everything or furniture for everything, and that's fine. One thing to consider, though, is if you are planning to put lighting onto this object, some light fixtures, Revit-based light fixtures anyway, will only glue to ceilings. Now, you probably don't want recessed lighting in this thing, but even surface-mounted lighting sometimes is very picky. So I'm going to create this as a ceiling family type. Click OK, and we'll just call it trellis frame, I suppose is the best name. And now we are drawing, we're sort of inside the family, and you have all of our options for either solid types of objects or here void types of objects. So an extrusion is what we'll need, and we can basically, it's a rectangle, so I'm going to click on the top of my view cube. This view cube kind of allows you to quickly manipulate your drawing, but if you click on the word top, it basically brings you into plan view, sort of. It's not a true plan in that sometimes you can snap to objects three-dimensionally and it doesn't change your reference plane to ground, which is a floor plan. But anyway, let's click a rectangle, and it just makes it a lot easier to be sure I'm clicking on the correct points. And there you go. I've got the outer frame of this trellis. And to get the inner frame, let's use offset. Or no, let's just use the same rectangle tool, but we'll give it an offset. I think maybe 1.5 inches is probably the right dimension. And, you know, it's going to go inside. So let's give it a negative 1.5 inches. I've changed the dimension because otherwise I think it'll draw it on the outside. So that's the main part of the frame. And if I remember from the picture, there is a middle part of the frame. Now, this is a little trickier. What we need to do is draw a reference line first in the middle using the midpoint snap. Let's draw this straight across. And then let's offset that puppy so that we get 1.5 inches dimension on either side. And so we have to type in 0.75 inches, or you could do 3/4 of an inch. But I don't know. Honestly, I don't know which one is faster. It doesn't really matter. And you see how it gives you the dashed line indicating which size it's on. Now, if yours is like mine, it's like, whoa, that is pretty muddy. Change the scale of your view to be something a little more, maybe 1.5 inches is probably good. See how, now I can see those lines. That's much better. I can delete this middle line, and maybe I'll use the break tool to break this line in half and then trim out the result here so we get a nice even trim. And do the same on the opposite side. And be aware, when you trim, it will trim based on where you click. So if I click the trim tool and click inside this wall, then it will trim that way, and I don't want to do that. So let's trim the wall, but click on the outside where we want the end result to be. Now, how thick is this extrusion? It's basically here in the menu. You can type in the value. I believe I said it was probably a 2x10, so 10 inches. We can actually make this. Well, let's just make it 10 because I think it may be metal. And apply. And now all you do is click check, and there you go. You've made yourself an instant extrusion. How nice. Oh, except I think I typed in 10 feet, didn't I? Let's go back, edit in place, and select the extrusion. And oh, yes, I did. I typed in 10 feet instead of 10 inches. So there you go. That's the beauty of these in-place models. They're very easy to edit. And you can see here, if I change my mind, I can edit these using grips, dragging things up or down, left to right. So super flexible in that way. Lastly, while we're editing the component, or let me double click on it so I am back into it, let's add a material. Now we absolutely could come in, just click inside this menu and click the 3 dots to add a material. I think, trellis slats is what I've created. And that's just fine. So to edit the material, we will have to go back in and edit the family, but that's fine. We don't need further control than that. Let's create the slats next. And for those, well, clearly, if you look at the image, you can see they're repeated, right? So that sort of element is more typical of a component, a standalone component. So let's do that. Let's create a standalone component. And when we do that, we'll go to the File menu, New, Family. So we're creating an entirely new standalone family. And you can see there are slightly different family options. There's no ceiling in this case. So we could use either generic, or I think I'm just going to use furniture. It seems a little more realistic to me. I'll create click open. And in this environment, you can see, first of all, it opens a couple of views. Now, I'll click on them. There's nothing there, right? I haven't drawn anything yet. And you can draw in any of these levels here, any of these reference levels. So I absolutely could draw using this elevation view. But it's kind of big, so I'm going to draw on the ground. And first of all, these dashed lines are reference lines, so we can draw our own, but I'm just going to use the ones that come with the family for now. There's the center front slash back, and then this one here is the left to right. So given the orientation of our model, just to save us a step, I'm going to orient them this way, and I'm going to start them at the origin. Here, the origin is where the 2 reference planes that are drawn meet, and I'll choose create extrusion. We've done this before, right? Create an extrusion. Let's give it a dimension. I think 5.5 inches is the nominal dimension of a 2x6. And then we'll draw lines here. I'll start at the home base there, and I'll draw it out. I can actually type in 16 feet. So I can save myself having to stretch it. And it's only 1.5 inches wide. And the reason I'm typing them in is it's kind of narrow, so it does make it a little easier. So there we go. I've got my shape, and I'll click the checkbox to finish. And you might say, well, what's that? And let's take a look at it. We can actually look at it in the 3D view here. And you can see it's a 2x6, not terribly exciting. But let's go to the right view here, and you can see it's a 2x6 that's sitting on the ground. I'd love to move it up to the height that it is in the model. I could do that in the model, but I could do it here too. And I absolutely could use these grips here to try and stretch it up, but better is to use this dissociate work plane toggle. So if I do that, now the object is no longer connected to the work plane that it was created on, and I can move it on up to the height that it is in the main model. And I believe the main model, those posts were 12 feet tall, and I think the frame was maybe 10 inches. So I'm going to move these up 12 feet, 5 inches. And I believe that should be correct. So then you want to save the model. I'll just save it as into my project folder. And lastly, load it into the project. Now, it gives you the option to load into the project and close, but I'm just going to load it into the project, like so. And you can see it wants me to place it somewhere. I'm going to place it, let's see, I'll place it right here on the ground. All right. And I suppose that the placement technique is I could have left it on the ground and just moved it over. I don't know, 6 of one, half dozen of another. So now let's put this up here in the top view and take a look. And I guess actually, if you look at the picture, this first slat doesn't occur until the inside of this frame, or at least that's what it appears. And I'm going to go with that. Now, how do you make multiple copies of this gorgeous slat that I've created? Well, it's pretty straightforward. Let's just go to the top here. You can select it, and there is an array tool. The array tool creates linear or radial arrays. I'll leave a little video to play. Great for this sort of thing, and also for furniture. And if you watch the video, it will basically make copies. And you can edit the array after the fact. You can specify distance. So I'm going to start by just making a copy, and the highlights after you make that copy, how many you want. I'm going to guess 6. Try that. And then if you move any one of these, it will stretch the array out. Let's take a look at that. I think that looks pretty good. And so we want to move these slats down ever so slightly. Again, this is kind of the design process. So I believe they're an inch too high. So I'm just going to edit the group. So when you create an array, it creates a group. So you just double click on it. You see how now I've got the slat again. And I can move it up or down just by changing the elevation that it was put in at. I'm going to just move it down 1 inch and apply. And you'll see that they all move down. One annoying thing about Revit, one of many, long list, is the way it handles when objects overlap rather than when they kind of fit together like puzzle pieces. And you see here the slats are kind of overlapping the ribs here of the frame, and it just doesn't look right. I could absolutely make this shaded view, and but I don't really like to operate in shaded view if I can. Partly it's just a little eye strain. It will look fine in the rendering engine, but we can fix this by just cutting little notches here so that they do in fact fit together. And to do that, it's pretty straightforward. We've masked this object as a solid. We can create a mass that's a void. So you go to the Create menu, Void Forms, Void Extrusion. You just have to make sure that you either draw it in the right elevation view or left elevation view, or if you insist on drawing in the 3D view, let's just pick the work plane as one of these vertical planes so that we can draw right on it. And if you don't happen to remember the dimension of these slats and their overlap, we can just measure it right here. I'll just zoom in on the front of this, and there's a little measure tool. Looks like a little tape measure. And let's see, looks like 3 inches. And that's what I've drawn here, a little rectangle for my void. And often when you create a void, I'll just click the little checkbox. Sometimes it goes the wrong way. Doesn't really matter if it goes all the way through or not. And when you click off of it, the void will take a bite out of your model. And what's cool is you can create the void and copy it. And this is easier done in elevation view just because sometimes things get out of whack in 3D. So I can copy this guy all the way down to the other end. And I believe that it was in the middle is the opposite one. Now, the only trick is selecting the void. You see how my cursor kind of has trouble finding it. Sometimes you can hit tab and tab will kind of cycle through what's selected. It's just that voids are invisible, so they're hard to see. You can also use solids and then convert them to voids after the fact. So I'll just copy this guy down to the middle and we'll have our notches, which we can load into the project now that it's done and see if they fit. And they do. So any other things you want to add, any decorative filleting or that sort of thing, you can add it into the family. And what's cool is you can see it right away and decide if you like the aesthetics of that element or not. Lastly, let's add a parameter onto this object here. Now, right now, it's just got the default material. It says by category. So whatever the default material for casework is, that's what this is going to be our furniture. I could just click in here and choose a material directly. However, I find it's a much better rule not to apply materials inside families, especially ones where you know you're going to be editing them. Instead, if you look very carefully, there's a tiny little box here that has nothing in it. That's the Associate Family Parameter button. Click on that, and now we can make a new parameter for this object. I'll just click New Parameter. It's a good place for it. And we have this option for type and instance. So instance would be when you want to have different slats have different materials. Now, of course, we want them all to be the same, so we'll just call it material, slat material. Very clever. And leave it as a type. Click OK. And we don't actually have to assign any particular material to it. Again, I'm going to save and load this into my project. In fact, I'm going to choose load and close because it'll close all these extra windows. And if you're like me and you don't like a lot of windows, you can also use this close inactive views button. That gets rid of extra views too. But anyway, I'm going to load this in, close, overwrite it, and I have actually changed a parameter now. So let's double click on this object, select it so that we now have the family. And what you'll see when you choose edit type, there's the type parameter. And I can just come in and assign a material like we've done several other times. Just try and find the material that you've created and remember what it is. Hopefully I've got one already created. And you're good to go. You've finished the group, and they should all change color with any luck. Let's see if that really worked. And it did. There you go. Oh, but I think I had the frame wrong. So here's the frame with the black material instead. I'm not going to go over how to create the built-in component in places needed for the base cabinet and the shelves. However, there is one trick that'll make life easier when you're doing that sort of thing, and that is the section box. And it's a view property. So if you go with nothing selected, it helps to click outside of the model. And you come down in the view properties, you should see a box for the section box. You just check that radio button, hit apply. And let's zoom out here. Where is that? Oh, yeah, there it is. This box, it has these little grabbers, these grips that you can use to drag the model forward or backward, up or down, so you can actually crop away the ground if you need to. And all the same view cube options apply. But now I can set this as my view, my reference plane, my work plane, and draw these extruded elements right here. It is, by the way, sometimes helpful when you're in this section mode to turn the view from kind of detail level of medium to a detail level of coarse. And that shows you the color of anything that's cut through. It kind of just default overrides anything cut through to show that material. And frankly, it's just a little helpful when you're trying to figure out, well, wait a second, where am I in space? A quick change to the view properties makes it easier. the idea to put a pizza oven out in the backyard here, and it gives me a chance to show you a couple of tricks when you're working on some object. First of all, I am actually making this out of walls because I want it to be hollow. And I could absolutely make this out of masses, but then I'd have to do voids, and I want to avoid voiding too much. The other thing is when you're working on an object like this, you actually can just isolate these objects, either the elements or the whole category. Now I have a mass in here, so I'm going to isolate just these elements and see how it hides the rest of the model. Obviously, that's super handy for this sort of thing anyway. And you can, when you're done, you can just click on the eyeglasses down here and reset this temporary hide isolate. You can also make a view with just this object on it, which sometimes is handy if you're doing a casework study. Anyway, walls have a bunch of features that can make them interesting. First of all, I want to taper these walls a little bit, maybe so that they meet this outer wall. Again, this is something, could do it more easily with masses, but walls do have this feature where you can make them slanted. And this is great if you're experimenting, trying to get a look that you like, in this case, a slanted chimney. And I could go and just go in the properties of the wall. You have to have it selected. And instead of a vertical wall, choose a slanted wall. And you can just apply an angle. I think I want it to go in, so it's going to be a negative number, so -5 degrees. You see how it moves. Now, if you look, it's actually got grips down here at the bottom, so you can change the wall like you normally would. You can also type in the number here if you want to change it. I don't know, to 4 degrees or something, as you want to experiment. But it behaves like a wall, so you see how it joins the outer wall. And again, you can do that using masses, but it does save a step. The other option here, let me undo back so that it's not slanted anymore, is you can make the wall tapered. And this has other applications, maybe not here in this model. And tapered walls are actually handy in the landscape settings, landscape applications. They're pretty easy, but you do need to edit the wall type and go into the structure of the wall and make the thickness of the wall variable. Why that doesn't just show up as an automatic thing, I don't know, but it doesn't. Anyway, once you do all that, you can come in, select the wall, and it will allow you to change it to a tapered wall. And tapered walls, like the slanted ones, I could type in the values up here, or I could literally just grab the grips and, in this case, create an instance override, which will allow me to change this instance. And the tapering can actually be irregular. So if it's a landscape wall, sometimes they're actually vertical on one face, or sometimes you can do something that's opposite. For example, tapering in or tapering slanting back. So a lot of fun options here in walls. Lastly, if you want to create an opening in a wall that's, say, the pizza oven opening shape. There's a number of ways. There is a wall opening, but these are rectangular, so they don't have quite as many uses. Editing the profile is the way to go if you want to do something like this. And it's very similar to split face. You get the outline of the wall, which can be changed to work around other built-in elements like slanted walls. And then I can draw a shape on here. Let's see, I don't know exactly what shape a pizza oven is like, but I believe it has kind of an arc. And again, we're just experimenting. But the advantage of this, it works like split face, but now I've actually cut a hole in the pizza oven. Well, I didn't really like that pizza oven all that much that I created, so I'm going to go to good old SketchUp, which has a free online web version. You just need to sign up for it and use the 3D warehouse. And the 3D warehouse right over here, if you're not familiar, is the vast library of objects. And you can just type in what you want, say a pizza oven, search for it, and you'll find so many models. You can just scroll through and really have a great range of choices. And I found one here that I loaded into my model. It's not too many polygons. And the advantage of SketchUp is that you can see it has a lot of detail that would be pretty tedious to do in Revit. And the only trick to get it to render properly, because we are using Lumion, Lumion can kind of see all of these materials, or at least the colors. We don't need to do anything other than make sure what we want painted has paint on it. But then you save your model and you can download the SKP file, and that's what you need to load into Revit. Okay, so back in Revit, you can load that model into your project. Just go to the Insert menu, and you can either link it or totally import it. I like to link it just because, I don't know, sometimes I change my mind or whatever. I need to edit it for one reason or another. And then just make sure that, one, you're searching for SketchUp files, so choose that as your file option. There it is. And one thing you'll want to try is, instead of auto origin to internal origin, do manual and center, and then make sure you put it on level 1. And this just makes it a little easier to place. Sometimes when you import these models, they go off into outer space, and it takes forever to find them. But now it just kind of comes in glued to my cursor. And you can see I did get an error message, so maybe some of the geometry wasn't right. And Revit is kind of picky about the kinds of geometry that it accepts. But this way, I can place the object, and if I absolutely need to, I can modify it. Oh, I guess I'm in the wrong work plane here, so let's to rotate this. But you can see that the object is coming in pretty good, and it appears to have all the detail that I'm expecting. And in fact, let's take a look at the colors and textures. And you can see the textures are largely lost, but there are materials of some sort on there, and that means they'll work fine when we get to Lumion. So it's finally time to render our projects. And before you do go over to the rendering engine, it's not a bad idea to check through the model and make sure that everything has materials. Using the paint bucket, you can type in PT and bring up the paint menu, or you can actually remove paint. This is sometimes a problem when you get a little out of hand or you click on an object that shouldn't have been painted. You could just remove paint in that way. And that looks good. So now I'm going to go to the Lumion tab. One thing you will want to check is this cog up here for Lumion settings, and make sure that your surface smoothing is set to high. And that's because anything curvy will look a little, oh, I don't know, faceted unless you do that. And I don't have the camera sync because I'm usually zooming around in Lumion. Then you just click the Live Sync button, allow it to launch Lumion, and away you go. Now, as it's launching, one thing to be aware is that you should pretty much get in the habit of always launching in the default 3D view, this little house. And this is just, it's a good habit, and also it makes it easy if you lose the sync and you need to get it back again. That's a good view to be in. And look at that, we have ourselves a model. And I'm not going to go through how to navigate Lumion, how to pick different materials, how to choose different objects, other than to say, in general, there's the select mode where you can select objects. Now, in this case, all we have is this existing model, and that's an imported model. And then there's the place mode. Now, we don't need any more models, but we can place trees. You can search for different types of trees if you have one in mind, or you can just spend some time going through the whole list here. There are people in various settings, and of course, each of these people, you can place them individually, or you can use some of these other placement modes. And finally, when you are trying to grab something and you can't remember what category it is, this select all categories is an awesome way to do it. Again, go check out my video on Lumion for all the full instructions on how to render your models. The only thing that I do want to point out here, one thing that is particularly tricky in Lumion is getting a nice floor plan. And I'm going to go to camera mode here, which, if you remember, or photo mode, if you remember, this is how you do it. And you can add a camera here. And you can add as many cameras as you want. And then each camera you can edit. So for example, I'm going to come in here and I'm going to grab an effect. say the orthographic view. Now, I mean, a lot of you for exterior views, you may be happy with just one of these custom styles, which interestingly enough, are not really custom, but they actually have all these ready-made things in them. Never quite understood that one. But anyway, let's add an orthographic filter here, just so you can see what we are looking at. And when you turn on the orthographic filter, I'll enable it. See how now it has kind of turned this into an axonometric. We can change the heading. So make sure you're in heading is set perpendicular to the camera, and then we can make the pitch so that it is facing from above. Now, here's the trick. We are not cutting through these columns and the walls, and we want to. So you could absolutely use the near clip feature. And if you hold down Shift, it kind of slows it down so that you can slowly eat away. But watch what happens. As we get to the walls, they disappear. And interesting enough, the shadow doesn't disappear, so you still see them, but none of the poche shows up. So near clip, not the greatest option, although it does create a kind of interesting view. Now, what are our options for fixing this? One, you could just say, I'll just draw the walls back in Photoshop. And that is perfectly fine. And in fact, sometimes that looks way better than drawing it in here. You can do a stroke and then a fill of selection areas, and it looks pretty sharp. The alternative method involves going back to Revit. And this is where it's important that you know the view that Lumion is synchronizing with. In this case, it's the default 3D view, like I mentioned. So I've turned on the section box in the default 3D view. And now I can just use the section box to crop away the top of the model. You see here, this is the color of what you get when you cut away a model and you turn your detail level to coarse. And this is helpful because now you can see what it's going to look like. Now you might think, wow, I don't want blue poche when I get to Lumion. And this is where it gets a little weird. The poche color is red. Why is it red? Well, it's because back in Revit, there's a material called poche, which is displayed in the coarse scale detail mode. And that color is what Lumion uses when you cut away the model. It's just kind of a quirk of the way Lumion works. Here, I'll make it a lovely black, and OK, and apply, and OK. And if you're in Lumion and you don't see the color change right away, just go back to build mode, and usually it will take a minute or two to update. Now, if you've done it several times, like I just have, sometimes you have to unsync and resync to get the color change to take effect. So to do that, up here in my Lumion build mode, there's the Stop Live Sync button. Click that. And by the way, this is what it will look like if you just launch Lumion without Revit. If all you're doing is working in Lumion, you don't need Revit up and running. And no matter what the situation is, if you haven't launched Revit and then you decide, oh, I do want to make a change, or like in our case, we're just unsyncing and then resyncing, just go back to Revit or call it up, go to Lumion and hit the Launch tab, Launch Live Sync, and it should resynchronize. And there you go. Your poche is black, and it should look correct in the camera view. And there you go. Your rendering is perfect. And one other little trick here in Lumion is to export different elements of your model as layers. So for example, I can export these trees as separately from the rest of the plan, and that gives me a little bit of, wiggle room when I go to do final composition and drawing touch-up in Photoshop. And the way that you do it is you go to select mode and make sure you're selecting the category that you want. I've got the trees, and I can use some of my toys here to select all similar objects. And you can see up here in the properties of the objects you've selected, you can actually just change the layer. And we could turn these layers on and off here in the build mode, which can be handy if you're trying to change some flooring or landscaping and you can't see it because of all the other objects. And here in photo mode, you can see the plan gets a little muddy with all these trees. What I can do, I can add a filter or an effect that controls the layers. It's here under the Utilities menu. Just go with Layer Visibility, and I can turn off the trees. And if I had any other layers, I can turn those off separately. So you can see I have one view that's nice and clean here. I'll just store this camera to make sure it knows that. And then I'm going to duplicate this photo. I'm going to copy it, and I'll paste it. And now in this photo, I'll go back to Layer Visibility, and I'll turn off everything else and turn on the site. Lastly, the effect that makes this all work is this Remove Background filter. I'll choose Remove Background, and you can see now I just have trees. So don't forget to save your file before heading over to the Export menu. And in that Export Photos menu, you can do the current shot, or you can do the whole set. And of course, we want to be as efficient as possible, so I'm going to do the whole set. And when you're ready to print, be sure that you choose poster size. This is going to get you the resolution that will print, or at least have the chance of printing, as best as possible. And by the way, when you are exporting these images, JPEG is fine. PNG supports transparency, which is fine, and has a little bit less compression. If you're working on a desktop, bitmaps are actually better because those will have even more information. You'll have less loss. I'm going to go with PNG for these guys. It's really important to check every one of your images, no matter how you're planning to present, printed or otherwise. Go into Photoshop and check that image for a couple of features because you can really fix it quite easily here. First of all, let's check the image size. So if we go to the Edit Image pull-down menu, there's an option called Image Size. And normally, Lumion exports at 72 pixels per inch. Why? I don't know. But printing resolution is a good idea that it's 200 pixels per inch. And we can change that number. Just make sure you have unchecked this resample button. We don't want to add or subtract any pixels. We want to just change the size, how many pixels you're squeezing into an inch. And here you can see the image size has gotten a lot smaller. I'll click OK. It doesn't look any different. You can zoom in or out. If you hold down Alt and scroll, that zooms you in and out. And if you hold down the space bar, you can now pan. And we can take a look at the image, and it looks pretty good. The other thing that you're going to want to do is adjust the image exposure and maybe even the shadows and things. And this is mainly as you render it, you don't always know how dark it's going to come out. And here, I think these shadows are a little dark. So the first step is turn this background layer into something that can be edited. You can just double click on it, and this converts it to an editable layer. And then let's choose the filter menu, and there's something called the camera raw filter. And what this will do, it's a photographic technique. And again, you can use Alt to zoom in and spacebar to pan. It allows you to adjust all sorts of different features. Oh, there's the overall exposure and contrast. You can see I can lighten that up very easily just using the exposure, but I can also tweak things like the shadows. If I drag this to the right or to the left, the shadows will get lighter or darker. I can make the whites a little lighter. It also has an effect of lightening it up. And sometimes you want to make the blacks either lighter or darker. You see how the shadows get a little lighter when I drag that up. And this is all a matter of taste, but absolutely when you physically print objects, it's going to be darker than what you see on the screen. And this is because the screen is a light fixture. So do this for every image. Make sure that they are consistent and that they are light enough that they'll print properly. Now, one other thing that you can do here in Photoshop is blend those layers that I mentioned when I exported the drawing with just the trees, which are clearly missing in this drawing, and with, I also exported one where there's no grass visible. So I'm just going to place those images here. If you choose File, there's an option to place embedded, and you should be able to drag and find those images. Now, because they were all exported at exactly the same resolution, they should fit right on top of each other with no kind of slop on any end. Now, for our purposes today, we're just going to use opaque layers. But you can see here's my layer with just the white background. Here is, I'll just turn it off over here in the layers menu. Here's my layer with just the trees. And then the very bottom is the grass. And basically, I can one by one kind of eliminate the areas that I don't want. So for example, in this one, I'll use the magic wand tool. I'll set it so that it is not contiguous and it does not sample all layers. And I can select, oops, I've got the wrong layer selected here. I can select all the white on this layer here, and I'll just hit the delete button. Now, if you get this error message, which I just did, you have to rasterize the layer. And this is because when I place embedded, it places a linked file. So I do need to rasterize it. I could also just copy and paste it into this drawing. You won't have this problem. To rasterize the layer, and you see how it has a funny little icon on it. Anyway, just right click on the layer here in the layer menu, and one of the bottommost options is rasterize layer. That'll turn it into an image as opposed to a linked file. In fact, I'll rasterize this other layer while I'm at it. And then I'll come back, delete the white area, Control D deselects everything, and you see how now I have this layer of the trees. Now, what good does it do me? They're awfully dark. Well, now I can add in something like a drop shadow, and that might help this drawing to read. And that is a layer style. If you come in here and choose drop shadow, you see how immediately you can start to see the trees a little bit, not for the forest necessarily, but just a little bit. I'll add maybe a little bit more of a shadow on there. And OK. And then I can drop down the opacity of the layer. Maybe it's a little too dark. So we'll just lighten it up a little bit and get just the kind of blending that I like. Now I can see my grill, my precious pizza oven underneath. This layer with the white background is a little more tricky. I can use the magic wand to select the white area and delete it. And I can use it to select these gray areas, but I think I'm going to use the contiguous option. That way, it only selects the areas that are gray, because I'm worried it'll select too much in the whole view. And if you have any extra little pieces here, you can always use something like the eraser to clean it up. And you might be thinking, doesn't that just look like the original image? Well, it does, but I can now go in and lower the opacity of the background layer, the one that has the grass on it. And now the grass is not nearly as strong as it once was. If you don't like the checkerboard in the background, which a lot of people don't like, I don't mind it. Under preferences, there's an option for transparency. And normally the grid size is a medium grid. If you just change it to none, you'll get a little bit better preview of what your drawing is going to look like. And you can see here, the grass is a lot less pronounced. The paving is a little bit easier to see. I could do other techniques like blurring the grass or just replace it wholesale if I decide that I don't like it. One last thing you can do, and this applies to plans and sections, is you can change this drawing, the poche, to be a nicer color. You can, again, use that magic wand and make sure you're on the layer that actually has the plan on it. That's the topmost plan. And I'm going to use the hold down the shift button to select all of these columns and the walls. And I'm going to make myself a nice new layer here down in the layers menu so that I can play around with it. And the first thing you can do is just choose Edit, Fill, and you can choose a color. So let's choose a color. And here, I'll pick one that's dramatic. We'll choose a nice red color. OK, and OK. And you can see I have created a layer that is red. In fact, let me turn off these other layers so you can see what I'm doing. The other thing you can do with this selected is you can go to Edit, and there is a stroke option. And the same thing, you can choose how wide the stroke is, and you can even give it a color. So for example, maybe I want white lines for my project. And the resolution, or I'm sorry, the width that you choose, it kind of depends on the resolution of the drawing. Maybe I'll go with 7 pixels and okay. And you don't really see much. Control D to deselect doesn't show you anything. But now when I turn back on these other layers, you can see I have a nice crisp white line on these objects. The other thing you can do, you can add a drop shadow onto that layer, and then the walls will cast a shadow. And that's also kind of a cool effect. So just save your drawing. It will be a PSD or Photoshop document. The other thing that you'll probably want to do is crop away the logo. You should always leave enough space to crop away that Lumion logo. Otherwise, you'll have to use some fancy Photoshop tools to get rid of it. So the last step to finishing up your projects is to make an InDesign board and prep it for printing. Now, I'm not going to go over everything in InDesign, other than to remind you, set this guide at inches and make sure you orient the model, or I'm sorry, the sheet correctly. The other thing is you don't want to have facing pages. You can have multiple pages, right? We can set 2 or 3 or 4. So if you know how many you want in advance, by all means, check as many as you think you'll need, and then click the Create button. And of course, you can always change the orientation depending on what you type in here, just by tapping the icons. The other thing is that if we have 2 boards that want to be next to each other, maybe you want the whole board to be easily composed, you can drag one board next to the other here in the Pages menu. The only trick there is you do have to go to this hamburger menu and tell InDesign don't allow the pages to shuffle. Don't know why, but that somehow seems to automatically kind of arrange them. And now I can just drag this page right next to the other one, and I can make any super graphics that want to translate over multiple boards. I can do that more easily. Now, I don't actually want 2 boards, I just want one, so I'm going to select one and delete it by just dragging it in the garbage. And there you go. 1 page is deleted. So all we need is 1. And in fact, I think I'm going to make it horizontally arranged instead of vertically. So the only other reminder I have for InDesign is to remember, if you want things to be correctly sized, do not click and drag, just click to place the objects. By what I mean here, I'll go to File, Place, or I can use Control D. And when I browse for my images, and here I have them in this file, first of all, be sure you import those Photoshop documents. And also, if there are any, please check the Show Import options. And I uncheck the Replace Selected Item because I can't tell you how many times I've accidentally done it. Anyway, I'll click Open, and in this case, there's only 1 artboard in this drawing, so it'll give me the option of what it looks like. Then, instead of clicking and dragging, I just click once with my left mouse button, and it should bring it in at the resolution that we created. Now, I happen to know that both of my drawings are vastly larger than I need for this board, in which case it's okay to resize them down. What you never want to do is resize them up so that they're bigger than they were originally. The other thing is when you resize in InDesign, you should hold down the Shift and Control button when you drag these corners, and that will resize the frame and the contents as well. Again, not here to do all those reminders. The only other reminder is one that actually is super hard and hard to remember, and that is, how do you set a plan to scale? So let me import my plan, and I'll show you. So there are 2 ways to set an object to scale. Obviously, it has to be an orthographic object. The easiest is if you zoom in and take a look at your plan, I can use mathematics to figure out how big it should be. So I need this plan to be 1/2 inch equals a foot. Well, I happen to know that the width here is exactly 20 feet. That's what I drew. So at 1/2 inch scale, 20 feet is 10 inches. So all I have to do is change my cropping to be whatever dimension I just figured out. And then over here in the width number, you see, actually it was pretty close. I can just change that to be exactly the size that I need it to be. Now I can come in take the internal image and holding down Shift so it doesn't lose its proportion, I can resize it to the width of this box. Okay, and you can see here, now my bounding box is correct, and I can crop away whatever I want of the plan or don't want. And of course, this is also handy if you want to get rid of that irritating Lumion logo. So anyway, that's one way to do it. The other way to do it is a little more tricky, and it requires Revit. So basically, we're going to export this floor plan at the correct scale and then place it in the drawing at that correct scale. How hard is that? Well, not too hard. One thing you will want to check, let's check and see what our crop boundaries are and crop down so I'm not exporting, a huge drawing. The other thing is if you do actually want any of these lines, you could use the lines in your Photoshop document. For example, maybe I really like these dark black lines. And in fact, I could use my visibility and graphic overrides. Just type in VG and up pops the menu, or it's in the View Properties menu also. And if you go over to the Walls layer here down in the model, you can see there's a whole column for Cut. And under Cut, you can override what the line or the patterns look like. And if I just click on the Override button and come in here, I do want a solid line, and I want it to be black. But maybe I want it to be a lot heavier here. We'll really dramatize it and make it 10 and okay. Now these do scale to the scale of your drawing, so you will want to check that. But you can see how when I hit apply, wow, that is a dark line, really impressive. And I can override any other line in here if I want. Maybe I'll tone these down a little bit. I just want to export a PDF file. That's up here in the top menu here. Click on the PDF export button. And choose the current window, and you might want to call it, lines from Revit. Make sure you choose a folder where you're going to remember where it is. But the most important thing is make sure it zooms to 100% of the size. You don't want it making it bigger or smaller. And vector processing is fine. That will give you a high quality image. And click Export from this menu. Now back in InDesign, when you place that plan that you just created, I'll click Open. If there are multiple pages, it will show you them. And I'll click OK. But again, just click to place, and it will place the image at whatever scale you had it set at. And you can use whatever techniques you want to change it. I'm going to draw some reference lines from the correctly scaled version here. And then I'm going to resize this image like we did before, holding down Control and Shift to resize it. And you can see you can get pretty accurate. Now, is this going to be something you do with construction drawings? Absolutely not. You would want to make sure that you're printing to scale very accurately with construction drawings. But this is the basic idea. This is how you can scale it pretty easily. Now, also, if you happen to like the lines that you've gotten from Revit, this is another way that you can use the lines from Revit. You can see that actually looks pretty good. However, I think I would combine them in Photoshop rather than InDesign, although that, it all kind of depends on your comfort level with your workflow. So lastly, whatever it is that you've got to put on your boards, be sure you do a final check